Hello, I am mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which do not count, but I also own Amazing Fantasy number 15, the very first appearance of Spider-Man and his origin story, and I think that of course counts. So, whatever, my collection's great. Anyway, over to you, other person.
I can't argue against any of that. What I can say definitively is that I'm Dapper Dan Gavaston. I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say count, and I believe I had before you. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy, and therefore I do have to concede the crown to my co-host, mischievous Mark Ginocchio.
And what else do we got to say, Dan?
I'm sorry, I was just basking in your glory.
Let it in. Let it in.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for our review episode of the latest issue of Amazing Spider-Man on Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and or future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review and help spread the word about our show. Dan, the other place where people can find out about our show and Spider-Man past, present, and future is, of course, our Substack, which is our brand new adjunct to the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. It is the Amazing Spider Talk Substack. That is where you're going to find things like B-book reviews and comic book nostalgia and questions from the readers and listeners of our show. What else can you tell people about the Substack, Dan?
Well, mainly that they should subscribe. Go to amazingspider.substack.com. It'll give you a place to subscribe, and then you never have to think about it again. Just like a podcast, one subscription is enough, and then it'll start showing up in your email and in your Substack app. Back to the podcast, though. This podcast and all the things that Mark and I do, including the Substack, exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep our podcasting going, go to amazingspidertalk.com and consider joining our Patreon. But today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 37. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover artwork is by Ed McGuinness and Marcio Menyz, and the interior artwork is also by Ed McGuinness, joined by Emilio Laiso, inks by Mark Farmer. Wade von Grawbadger makes his triumphant name re-debut, and Ed McGuinness, the greatest name. And we got colors by Marcio Menyz and Erick Arcinega, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramanga. This issue was first released on November 8th, 2023. Mark, we got a short time to do this. Get back to our Rek-Rap recap of Amazing Spider-Man number 37.
I'm going to miss it when we can't call it that anymore, Dan. We open with the Repossessor paying Peter Parker a house call, except at the exact same moment, Randy Robertson is knocking at the door looking for Peter so he can hook him up with that wall crawler fella he hangs out with. Well, anyway, the Repossessor gets a knowing look and after uttering the word collateral, attacks Randy to set us off onto Rek-Rap Storytime adventure. Rek-Rap is fighting Kraken the Hunter, who wants to marry Rek-Rap alive. Rek-Rap corrects him to Barry, but Zeb Wells and Nick Lowe, those anti-marriage zealots, know what they're doing here, right? During the fight, we even get a well-placed "look out," which also proves that Wells and Lowe study our podcast way too intently. Let's kick it over to Dan and his conspiracy board. What does "look out" mean here, Dan?
Well, you see, Lowe must have known that I was on the lookouts from the Spencer run. So here he's clearly telling me that I was in the right to notice them and that I should, quote, look out, unquote, for more lookouts in the future. I'm on to you, Nick Lowe. Don't think I've let the trail go cold. I'm waiting for the big Captain Stacy reversal moment in the pages of this title. I see you. Look out!
Awesome. Anyway, as it turns out, Rek-Rap is actually recalling the time that Repossessor absorbed Kraken into his hellmouth. And Peter is like, hey, that seems brutal. But as someone who is now best friends with Norman Osborn, I can kind of justify this as a way to send people back to limbo. So just shut up about it. Rek-Rap wants to get into another Storytime adventure, and Peter tells him to just get on with it. And now I know Marvel is studying our podcast, especially my recaps of their comics, because wouldn't it just be nice for someone on the show to give a straight-up synopsis of a story? Of course not. What's the fun in that, Dan? Rek-Rap recalls the licking of the side of the apartment building thing, which leads him to have a lead about the Repossessor's attic in Queens. And Dan, I'm tempted to kick it back over to you and your conspiracy speculation board, but I'm going to resist. Right on cue, Norman Osborn bursts into the scene, and he seems even more dismissive about Rek-Rap than he was about Otto's arms. He's also dismissive of the fact that he's a proven murderer and overall sociopath, but somehow that's less damning to Oscorp's profitability than being seen interacting with Rek-Rap, right? I mean, you know, the Fortune 500 company. Anyway, that brings us over to Limbo, where Madeline Pryor is chiding the Repossessor about not having Rek-Rap by now, and for being distracted with his little side quests. She utters a warning to not confuse the two. I bet you that won't factor into anything. Anyway, since we got a major event coming in less than a month, we interlude over to Long Island City, which is not actually a part of Long Island, but is on the same landmass as Long Island. Think about that, people. I'm going to leave you with that. While you're doing that, Hammerhead's talking about bumping off Count Nefaria's daughter, Madame Mask. Thank you for the Magia genealogy lesson here, Marvel. I forgot about all that. Anyway, right on cue, Nefaria shows up, and I'd like to use this interlude as an opportunity to point out how utterly silly it is for a crime boss to be sitting there in tights and a cape, okay? It's dumb. Okay, anyway, Nefaria is all like, that's right, I put Hammerhead up to murdering my daughter because you'd never expect it, and that makes me think even more that Madame Mask did not die. And Dan, do I even want to kick it over to you again and hint at it? No, I'm going to keep going. Got to keep this thing moving, or I'm going to be like Rek-Rap, no time for conspiracies. Rek-Rap is solving mysteries. So Spider-Man has no interest in Rek-Rap's attic mysteries, basically echoing my feelings about this, and he drives Rek-Rap out into the middle of the woods and opens the car door and tells him that this is his new home now and to get out, or at least that's kind of like my emotional reaction to the scene. Anyway, it's further accentuated by the Repossessor coming to take poor, sweet Rek-Rap away. So now, selfish Peter gets back to his apartment and notices that things are quite astray, and that then he notices Randy's cell phone, and now he cares about the Repossessor in the attic. What a jerk. Spidey swings his way over to the attic in Queens, while we get a glimpse of Rek-Rap traveling down the Demon's Mouth chute into Limbo's limbo, with the rest of his supervillain rogues gallery. He's told there that he's never getting out, and good thing it's just a minor character like Rek-Rap who's been banished there. But wait, Spider-Man shows up in the attic looking for Randy, and he's caught by surprise by the Repossessor, and before he can get a leg out, the Repossessor attacks and swallows him whole, banishing him to the same hellmouth that all the other lost souls belong to. Clearly, there is no way for Peter to get out. What a way for Amazing Spider-Man to end. Rest in peace, Peter. I don't know what we're going to talk about in this episode, Dan, since this is all over, but why don't you take it away?
I swear, Mark, if I played that recap back to myself like 6 months ago, I think I would have thought that you had lost your mind, because it just sounds like a bunch of insanity. Which is funny. Like, I don't think that this issue is packed full of plot, but when you lay it out there, there's a fair amount happening, or at least to be explained. But getting to the discussion, Mark, last issue ended with the Repossessor acknowledging that he knew Peter Parker's identity. So it's a kind of a sort of a promise that this story would turn more personal to Peter Parker. And right out of the gate, we see the Repossessor in Peter's apartment attacking someone close to him. given the goofy nature of the previous issue, was this issue able to fully invest you in this light interlude adventure between Rek-Rap and Spider-Man before we get to Gang War?
I honestly, Dan, absolutely not. This is like, I mean, like they're maybe they're doing some heavy lifting here in terms of like it's personal now because Randy's involved, but like the stakes seem, it's almost like the stakes are so absurdly high that they're not high at all. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm not buying any of this. You know, hence my very melodramatic read of the finale there. Like this is like clearly there are like caveats and trap doors galore being laid out in the story itself in terms of like how, you know, how's PD and Rek-Rap going to get out of this? Oh, nevertheless, you know what I mean? Like it's just never going to happen. Like this is not how it ends, Dan. No, I don't think I maybe because I just don't buy this as being truly dramatic and as, you know, dire as maybe it would seem on the page. I don't think this really got personal or real in any kind of way. It's still just very absurd and very irreverent. And I mean, it's not to say I don't like it per se, but it's not. This is cotton candy. For lack
Well,
of a better phrase.
that brings up an interesting point, which is like, I guess it's important for any book to have clear stakes. But if you treat, as like some people on the internet do, every Spider-Man book as the potential final Spider-Man book, I'm getting flashbacks to like Amazing Spider-Man 700, where it's like Peter's dead, wink wink, we'll never see him again.
Yes.
And I like that Nick Lowe in the letters page here, and he's done this many times before, where he just treats the cliffhanger ending as if it were a matter of fact cliffhanger ending. Like, yeah, Peter definitely got eaten by a demon, is now dead, and it's the end of Amazing Spider-Man. And yet we all know it's not,
Right.
So how we weigh each individual story seems to have some variance, like Amazing Spider-Man 700 felt like the end because the stakes had been built up to that, and not every story needs those stakes. In fact, I would find that fairly exhausting. And so this is pretty light. So then the question is like, okay, it doesn't have those stakes. It may not be as personal as we might want, every issue of Amazing Spider-Man to be, but then does it succeed on its own merits, right? Or its own particular goals, in which the case, I would say this issue is trying to be a little bit of a mystery, like a bit of a comedic adventure, and a sort of fourth wall breaking exercise to just kind of clean your palate before Gang War. And does it succeed on those expectations? What do you think?
I mean, yeah, it's just it's very hard to get too invested in something that's just patently absurd. I think that's what it boils down to for me. It's like, there is a line, and I think this has kind of crossed that line in terms of like, we I refer to the last issue as being a bit of a palate cleanser, coming off of the Craven the Hunter storyline that was very dark and kind of introspective in terms of Peter and what he was going through. The Doc Ock storyline was kind of similar, coming off of the Miss Marvel death of storyline. In this instance, it's like I mean, if I'm being completely real here, this feels like, I know we're going to get one more issue after this one before Gang War kicks off. All the same, this feels like about an issue and a half comics worth of plot that is being dragged into 3 issues. It's like I'm already, we're now 2 issues in, and the fact of the matter is about halfway through this comic, I was kind of done with the storyline, and I don't feel anything about the twist and the ending here changes that makes me invested. Like, I know this is a farce. There are breadcrumbs galore about how this is going to be reversed between some of Madeline Pryor's stuff and just general, like, having read comics for umpteen years, I know what's going to happen here. Like, I don't, like I said a few minutes ago, I don't buy it for a second. And the fact is, the characters involved here, you brought up Amazing Spider-Man number 700. And, let me just say, in case it needs to be said, there was a big difference between a fight to the death with Doc Ock, one of Peter's very, well known and well respected adversaries, and the demon that we think is the bill collector from earlier in this run, swallowing him into some kind of hellmouth, where he's going to be joined by Rek-Rap and the what is it, the it's not the Sinister Six, it's the I forget I already forget what Zeb called them.
Yeah, it's like the ghoulish six. I'm thinking of like maybe it's the ghoul goblin I'm thinking of, or whatever.
Yeah. And the grave goblin. Anyway,
grave goblin.
Being, it's like this feels like a Spider-Ham story, which maybe by the time this comes out into our main feed, we will have talked about Spider-Ham in our series episode of Amazing Spider Talk. But the fact of the matter is, this is so silly and so irreverent and so disconnected from reality, if there is such a thing as reality in superhero comics, that this doesn't pass muster for me. Like, this is like, I don't dislike it, because at the end of the day, this is still kind of silly and dumb, and not like so dumb that like I'm bored by it, but also this is just like, I have zero investment here. There are zero stakes for me, and the sooner we get to this into gang war, where there's clearly big stakes at simmering, the better for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned kind of turning off after the first half, and I feel the same way, because my big problem with this issue is not even the silly low stakes tone. It's that it's like the framing of the story, I feel like, is all backwards. Like, the reader and Spider-Man are ahead of the story for the first half of this issue. Like, the first half of this issue feels like a Rek-Rap recap. Like, he's like, hey, I fought Kraken the Hunter, and I thought the Mary line was funny and all of that stuff. But it's like, yeah, we already know that the repossessor is eating these guys. Like, and so much of this issue is him telling that story and like, hey, we're going to go to the attic again and again and again. And it's like, yeah, we get it, and especially if you were a smart reader of the previous issue and noticed those details, as we discussed on our last episode, none of this will be particularly shocking. And so, like, even Spider-Man is like, get on with it, Rek-Rap. And it's like, okay, like, and then add on top of that, which is like, it's really hard for the reader to distinguish like what Spider-Man's stakes are in this, because it seems like the repossessor is following Madeline's instructions, right? Like, go out, eat these things, and send them back to Limbo. And like, should we feel bad about that? I don't really know. I felt like the last issue did a good job of kind of placing Rek-Rap as a vigilante that was doing his own thing, but that really never got developed much here until we get to the very end of this issue, where even then they kind of like spell out that like the repossessor might be kidnapping humans and taking them to Limbo. But if that was the case, that should have been the threat and the stakes all along, rather than our fear about whether or not, these various Sinister Six incarnations are getting sent back to Limbo, because frankly, shouldn't they be? Like,
You're the voice of Peter here, which is like, Rek-Rap, like, go back, you know what I mean? But we're supposed to care about Rek-Rap here, which, your mileage may vary there, but like,
I like Rek-Rap, but then like, you can do the silly character that also happens to be kind of like right. But we need to be in Rek-Rap's perspective and seeing why he's right, and no one will listen to him.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, and to your other point about like, is the repossessor taking humans and bringing them back. The fact of the matter is, like, again, like in terms of the breadcrumbs that I feel are being laid there, which makes this very low stakes. I mean, like, Madeline has that scene with him where she's just like, you better not be getting caught up with your side quests. I mean, it's like, there's the threat, you know what I mean? So like we have the caveat for all of this right there, like whatever was ultimately going to happen when it gets revealed that this guy has Randy and Peter and God knows who else in his little limbo area, she's going to be like, no, you have to send them back. That wasn't the deal. It's the deal Madeline made with Erick Adams, so she's got to stay with it, like, sorry, I'm blurring the lines here, but what do you think of Rek-Rap himself? As we talked about famously, obviously we're getting more Rek-Rap than either of us could have ever imagined, and yet I think in the last issue we were kind of still in on the joke. Are we still in on the joke?
I still think he's very funny. I think there's real potential for him to be funny, and I think if he's in his own thing, I would 100% read an Ed McGuinness Rek-Rap B title, But I also think that Zeb Wells isn't quite sure what to do with him as much in this issue as he was in the previous one. A lot of the jokes here feel like repeats, and the visuals as well. We get like the return of the trench coat, and it's like, okay, yeah, that was funny, but like the appeal of Rek-Rap is only going to be what new weird thing can you get him to do? And it's like, okay, web wanging is still funny, but it's not as funny. And so like you have to constantly be adding new weird things, and like, people boxes is kind of funny. I love the man-sized spider is equal to the strength of 13 tunas. Like, it's funny, but it's not entirely new enough to make me like still want more. And, like, especially on its like second issue of the story, it's like, you should still be like throwing fastballs at this point if this idea has enough staying power. I mean, even the Storytime adventures, as funny as they were, it was like, I felt like an opportunity to take the visuals in a whole weird, different way. And it just felt like, okay, we did a coloring gimmick, which is fine, but not quite as like far as I would want it to go. And, even Ed McGuinness, like, as much as he loves drawing Rek-Rap, and he even does some really cool images here that play off of Romita Sr. references. And you can, if you look carefully, he writes after Romita in a couple of the panels here that are direct references to classic Romita panels. But like, even he feels like he's kind of running out of ideas in this comic for Rek-Rap.
Yeah, I said a few minutes ago, it feels like Spider-Ham. I stand by that. Like, we'll talk at length about Spider-Ham and whatnot in this season of Amazing Spider-Talk. But the fact of the matter is, like, I feel like these are characters and gimmicks that are effective in very small, limited doses, and we're just exceeding it. Like I like even when web hanging. I'm still laughing at it, but like it's full belly laughter is now becoming a chuckle, which will by next issue become a you know what I mean? It's just like like every iteration it gets less and less, and we're getting past it, like we're like I love you, Rek-Rap, but like we're running out of laughs. That's the bottom line. I don't see the longevity here at all.
I am ultimately glad that we're getting an additional Rek-Rap story here to at least firm up like who and what he is. Sure. If he were to be something down the line, or like even just to like say, like, if I were to say I like Rek-Rap, that initial story was still shaky enough that I don't feel like I could really tell you what the appeal of the character was. And here, at least, I'm like, okay, like, I get the conceit of Rek-Rap. And I know we wrote it in our Substack. I'm like, I don't get Spider-Boy. I feel like I get Rek-Rap more than I get Spider-Boy. But I similarly am like, okay, time for you to go. Like,
Yeah.
like I want to get back to the stories of Peter Parker.
Yes.
And so that's kind of how I feel about this. So anyway.
Yep. I'm with you. All right. Well, I bet you there's a place where we can talk about Rek-Rap and Spider Ham and all of that stuff, Dan. You want me to tell people about it?
Why don't you tell me? Because I'm endlessly curious.
I know. With a transition like that, how can you not want more? Anyway, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you could jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and much, much more. Dan, what's been happening in the Slack this week?
Mark, I want that intro to our Slack conversation as much as I want more Rek-Rap comics. Mark,
or the notes, what the notes are going to say. You want more of this too, I bet, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, Mark, this week in the Slack has been a discussion of our thoughts on the Marvels. I say our thoughts, Mark. Neither you and I have seen the Marvels yet.
No.
And I don't know how eager you are to race out and see it. I feel the same way. I'll be honest. Captain Marvel's probably my least favorite MCU movie.
Yeah.
And not for the reasons that online trolls would have you believe, but
you just hate women, Dan. I know.
That's it. 100%. Yeah. I like the characters in this, and it got decent enough reviews. Apparently it has the lowest opening of a Marvel movie ever, but it seems like to be well liked amongst the people on the Slack. And me not rushing out to see it is more to do with my work and being a young, like a father than anything else. And I got to admit, the availability of all these things on Disney Plus has really changed a lot of my habits towards rushing out to see Marvel movies.
For sure.
Unless they're going to be a real cinematic adventure, and like a James Gunn movie is going to get me there. I don't know how much a Miss Marvel movie is going to do it for me. But anyway, if you've seen the Marvels and you want to tell me, Dan, you're making a real mistake, you should rush out and go see this, come join in the fun in our amazing Spider Slack. There's a link in the description of this episode that'll let you sign up really quick, as fast as light as Spectrum would have you go. And come say hi. We'd love to see you in the amazing Spider Slack.
Awesome. Well, okay, Dan, let's get back to our review here. Let's talk about that gang war interlude. I talked a little bit about the Marvel Magia genealogy, about Count Nefaria and Madame Mask. And look, like I'm glad they kind of did it. I mean, at the same time, it's like we're really like gonna be diving deep into the Marvel underworld here in gang war, it seems. What do you think about all of this stuff?
Well, I do wonder, first of all, we saw Count Nefaria not too long ago in the pages of this title, right? He was a fixture in the end of the Nick Spencer run, right?
Yeah, did he get his sins back, I guess, or what?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, we had talked about how that seemed to have been implied but not shown. So I imagine that here, this is evil Count Nefaria. With a name like that, you kind of have to be evil.
He's not Count Benevolent.
Right. Yeah.
Count Benevolus and his daughter, Madam Wonderful. I don't know. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. But I will say, because the Nick Spencer run did not highlight this, is Count Nefaria did used to run the Magia. Like, he was one of the founders of the Magia and is a major player in that. The thing that I'm curious about here is just, my worry about any kind of major event or gang war thing like this. And I look back to like Sinister War is this thing going to get overcrowded? Are there going to be so many players in this that it's impossible to kind of keep straight? And like, for our audience, I think it's safe to keep highlighting, like, yes, Count Nefaria did run the Magia. His daughter is Madame Mask. Two characters that kind of don't have much of a history in Amazing Spider-Man.
Nope.
They're much more related to Iron Man and other various characters in the Marvel universe. But the thing that has me optimistic based on this 2-page preview is the role of Tombstone in it, which is to say, like, Tombstone seems to be still, we talked about this last week, playing the lackey to higher up powers. And, not just to like keep trumping my theory that Madame Mask isn't dead and it was all a fake out. I just don't. I mean, Tombstone has long been someone else's goon, right? But I have a feeling that the prominence of him being featured here as just a guy that sits quiet as Count Nefaria runs his hand over Tombstone's head, like literally treating him like an object. To me, there's clearly something else going on here. We still don't know who hired Shotgun. He said he was hired by a new player, and I would say Count Nefaria, not a new player, right?
Nope.
So I don't know. You said it in your recap. I have a real sneaking suspicion that Tombstone has a bunch of cards up his sleeve that have yet to be played. What's your read on this? Did this make you feel one way or the other?
I mean, yes, obviously I hinted as such in my recap. I mean, like, I feel like we're going to be getting a lot of sleight of hand and subterfuge here. I do share in the concern that you raised about, are we already overstuffing this story before we get into it? Like, I don't know. We haven't even dealt with the kingpin of it all yet, which is supposed. Yeah. I'm assuming we're going to get some Wilson Fisk action here. So it's like, we're talking about Fisk and Hammerhead and Nefaria and Madame Mask and Tombstone and Silvermane. We saw his severed head last issue. Right. I don't know. It just seems like a lot. And we already know we're also getting like how many tie-in issues and miniseries, a la Spider Island. So like, Zeb's got a lot to pull off here. So
I mean, yeah, but there's also like, the Lonnie Lincoln of it all. I mean, there's a ton, and it's like a big mega arc. So maybe there'll be plenty of places for these to play out across a variety of titles. We'll see. And I think like, and I don't want to, jump in on what you're saying here, but like, or steal your thunder in any way. But like, to me, the worry isn't even necessarily that there's too many players. It's that Spider-Man gets lost amongst all the players,
Spider-Man gets lost and the focus is muddied. I think that's the bottom line. It's like, I think that there is plenty of latitude for a well done street level story in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, but like that is contingent on, yes, as you mentioned, Spider-Man and Peter being key players, but also just the story having focus and not like going in too many directions where it just feels like nothing gets adequately resolved. So we'll see. But at the same time, like, I would much rather have a story like this than, frankly, a story about, gods and time jumps and all that other fun stuff that we got in the first year of this run. So, bring it on. I just know that there are some ever so slight flags being placed here that I'm like, okay, let's see how we resolve this and deal with this and adjust to that. So,
And
anyway.
I'm willing to give Zeb Wells the benefit of the doubt after the first 5 issues of his run, the one truly grounded street level story that we've got focused on these gangs is maybe the best Spider-Man story in a decade. That's probably too much praise to throw at it, but like it was really a great story. Good story.
We could say that. Yes, for sure.
Well,
not a street level villain, but do we want to talk a little bit about the Repossessor himself or itself as a villain here? Where does he rank in the pantheon for you, Dan? I mean, top 10 villain, right? I mean,
I mean,
maybe does he replace the
I'm
Scorpion?
I'm waiting to see. I'm waiting to see the like what the motivation is. Like, I really thought that this issue we would get what the motivation behind this character is, because there's clearly something else going on as seated back in Amazing Spider-Man number 14. The real question I have here is, do you, Mark, think that the book expects us to know that he's the collector from earlier on, or are they saving that as the big reveal in this upcoming third issue? Because like it didn't really spend much time on that. So it's like, it's not confirmed it, which means like it's playing somewhat coy, but I tend to think that Zeb Wells thinks we're reading these books pretty acutely.
Closely.
Yeah. So I don't know. How do you feel? Like, do you feel like that is a card that's up the sleeve waiting to be played? We're just kind of ahead of it, or we're supposed to know that and accept it and move on accordingly?
Not to disappoint you, Dan, but I actually think it's the former and not the latter. I think that they're gonna like bust this out as like a shocking reveal in the next issue, and we're gonna be like, yeah, we've known that for 2 comics now.
Yeah.
Like I yes, I think that for close intent readers of Amazing Spider-Man, this mystery has been solved. But given again, like this, the kind of like low stakes posing as high stakes storytelling that we're getting here, I think that's going to be presented as a big reveal here, and that kind of colors me unimpressed. I also think that the repossessor is essentially going to be neutered by Madeline when this is all said and done, because again, it's in the text that that's what's happening here, that she's just going to be like, no, that's not what I asked you to do, go away, like it all seems very cut and dry. But hey, like if we want to get a third part of the story, I guess that's pretending that is not what's going to happen might be a way to do it. I don't know. I just feel like this all seems very obvious to me right now, but maybe I'm being cynical.
Well, I mean, there's also this whole idea of like the collateral of like him taking Randy and returning to this attic that again was seated in Amazing Spider-Man number 14. Like, I don't feel like we got any additional wrinkles here other than the fact that it seems like he's taking people and he's done it to multiple different people in the wake of like, capturing these villains. Maybe it's like a trade-off of some kind. My big question is, does it actually relate to what he wanted Peter for at the beginning of this run, which seemed very clear to me. He's just there to collect bills. And frankly, I find this all way less interesting than just a guy that wants money from Peter for his hospital stay. My big question, and the real thing that's going to like make this, potentially more interesting, is if they can yes and that in an interesting way in the next issue. And I don't know that they can. In other things about the Repossessor, I'm glad we're getting a new villain. I don't love this one. I like his look. I like the ghostly pale guy in a kangaroo cap. Like I think that's an interesting looking guy. The tentacle mouthed villain thing is a little too busy from like my liking to want to return to this guy very frequently. But Ed McGuinness draws a creepy looking specter of a dude. So now that we spent more time with him, I'm like, okay, I think I get this guy. But for him to be anything worth returning to or caring about, they're gonna have to pull off a real kind of like hat trick with this final issue. So
all right, well, we'll find out. Do we want to get to some grades here, Dan?
Yeah, I'm going to give this one a C-.
I am right there, aligned with you. C- for me. It's slightly below average, alas. Sorry, Rek-Rap, we love you, but not really. We love you.
I still like you, Rek-Rap.
We love you with conditions.
Yeah. The condition being go away.
Yes.
All right, Mark, why don't you take us home, because we have to go away as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same week the comics release. Also, exclusive artwork and a ton of other bonuses. So a thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do. We have no new contributors this week. Help us change that. Get your name on the roster of our Patreon.
To download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like Tom DeFalco, J.M. DeMatteis, Ron Friends, Mark Bagley, David Michelini, and many, many, many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
And if you haven't yet, please check out our Amazing Spider Substack. That's at amazingspider.substack.com, where Mark and I talk about all things Spider-Man that wouldn't fit into our show. That includes B titles, comics nostalgia, Spider-Man news, and so much more. So, Mark, until we lick the walls of our podcasting studios to determine how evil they are and perhaps how dusty they are, what's our motto?
You make it sound so tasty, Dan. With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.
In yours, it might just prove that you to get drunk off of the spillage that has occurred in your studio.
Yeah, well, that's very true. The people box where I record is very liquor soaked right now. So there we go.